Jack and Eleanor, thank you very much for speaking to me. Can you start just by very broadly defining the problem that you're trying to solve?
Yeah, so there are a couple of components to this. Yeah, I'll take quite a broad approach. A couple of components to this. When we first came to this project, there are a couple of angles. So as a business, Carbon Jack, we do a lot with businesses to help them understand and reduce their environmental impact, which is like a big thing, measuring their carbon footprint, putting in place, reducing it as much as possible and going beyond that. So that is kind of the basis we come to work with all of our clients. But the thing beyond that with this project and why we really want to do it is the kind of consumer aspect, the awareness and like getting people as engaged as possible. So the reason we came to even start Carbon Jack in the first place was looking at loads of environmental organizations that were basically a bit boring, a bit cliched, green emoticon leaves. All they're doing really is talking to people that are already really active and really engaged, or they're being really preachy in a way that is, don't do this, don't do that, and just people just get turned off. Whereas, as you'll know, the vast majority of people do think of this as a really big issue and they want to do something about it. So you have to make it as engaging, as interesting, as attractive as possible. So that was the approach to the business. And then this was a really interesting project and why I wanted to do it, because it's around kind of producing a product that we hope is pretty interesting, a little bit edgier, like quite cool with the label that we've done, very high quality with the quality of Eleanor's winemaking, but then also just making people think about stuff. So, consumers do have power of the decisions that they make, and it's making them aware that where they put their money does matter. And if loads of people start almost demanding that the wine that they buy or the other products that they buy has to have these criteria in place as a basis, it has to be natural and organic. You have to have done stuff about reducing your emissions as much as possible. You have to think about the packaging. Then it's going to drive like wider change in the industry. So that's kind of how, sorry, that's a bit rambling, but that's kind of how we came to the project from our side.
Okay, so you're doing the carbon footprint analysis. You're advising on how you can lower it. You do the work and then it's independently verified. Do you verify it yourselves, or how is that part done?
Yeah, so we verify ourselves. So our role working with other businesses is to verify the carbon footprint assessments that they do or that we have done for them, and then provide them like with the credibility. So just to give like a bit more context on how we approach the project as well, which I think is helpful, is the starting point was that Contra Soarda and Eleonora already pretty sustainable anyway, natural organic winemaker. There's lots of stuff they do on their site to promote biodiversity. And I think, as you'll probably know, like a lot of vineyards are quite good on that aspect in Europe, so on the continent certainly. And it's sort of, we kind of wanted to go even further and go beyond that, and then take like quite an operational, like analytical approach to the carbon emissions, measuring it, reducing it as much as possible, seeing what we can do with the packaging of the product, lighter weight glass, where we can go in the future in terms of alternative forms of packaging. And then the final bit being, okay, we've done all that, but there's still these unavoidable emissions from the creation of this product, and then investing that in projects to kind of compensate for that and go even further and try to have a positive impact elsewhere. So
Eleanor, when you were looking at it from the winemaker point of view, was there anything that Jack came up with and you thought, oh man, I don't want to do that? Or, challenges that seemed like a big leap for a wine producer?
Measuring was a hell of a job because a lot of measures are like estimation also of your waste and this sort of things. And obviously we always try to estimate the worst scenario. So we have been going through a lot of papers and bills in order to, try to provide them with very credible and coherent data. And also going back to your question before, when you ask Carbon Jack how they verify their credits, I have to be completely honest at the beginning as a wine producer, although, our winery, like Jack has mentioned, has always focused on very natural friendly aspects, such as biodiversity, investing on organic viticulture, very low intervention way of making wines. But we have been always very skeptical to talk and mention the word sustainability, both on our, practical everyday job, but also on a marketing, a communication aspect, because this word is very much undervalued in our industry. So you hear a lot of people talking about, oh yeah, we're sustainable or we're making a sustainable product. But then in fact, when you look into it, you start really making questions and seeing that there's something missing. So once finally Carbon Jacket approached us and came to us with such a cool project that was also verifying this sustainability credit and the entire processing, then we thought maybe that's the only way we're going to do it, because otherwise it doesn't look very credible. And we wanted to have something certified and that was really making a difference in some ways.
Okay.
This is what I really wanted to mention, because before I was always so skeptical about this. And finally, when they came with this project, we really thought this was a great way to finally promote concrete sustainability.
Okay. Yeah. I think you touched on something very interesting. We know now that the public want these kinds of products, in terms of they want things that have been analyzed, they want to trust that it's been produced sustainably, etc. But I think what we have a problem with is articulating when we're doing it, how we're doing, what the shortcomings are, and having that sort of straightforward conversation. I think that's possibly what we're trying to articulate now, in this conversation, but also amongst other journalists. Can you talk about, were there positives that came out of this for you, where you thought, well, actually, this is either it's good for my business, or we've saved money here, or anything that positive that you didn't necessarily anticipate?
Well, for us, it had a lot of good aspects. First of all, we started a reflection process over the entire processing, from our viticultural aspects to the winemaking aspects, and also how we can improve them, not just now or what we have done for the production of this wine, but also in a long-term future. We really switched the way we are also thinking on projects and investments for the future. So now we are looking into investing also in solar panels and things that are going all into that perspective. And then, of course, also sales-wise, I would say that this had a great impact on the communication, to value the other aspects that we've been always focusing on in Contra Soarda. So to really value our low intervention way, our focus on the environment, biodiversity, organic viticulture, and so on. And then, of course, like we said, people are now really looking into this type of products. So, having marketed Europe's first carbon negative wine is really helping us also on sales perspective to open up new world markets that before were not very keen on having a random winery from the Breganze DOC that is such an unknown appellation from Veneto. So now, we came up with a project that sounds very international and that has potential also to open new commercial markets.
Jack, can you talk a bit about the challenges that you face, or that are unique to the wine industry, and maybe the types of things you do to overcome them, and that other people might be either experiencing or just interested to see what's unique about sustainability and carbon reduction in wine?
In the wine industry?
Yeah,
it's an interesting one. So I think there's a broader point actually that I think is quite specific to the UK industry that isn't faced, but I just think is actually a massive issue, which is how difficult the UK growers find it to grow anything without some sort of pesticide or fertilizer, just because of the quality of the soil, which should be really aware of. And I think people don't quite appreciate just how bad an issue it is to be using these types of products in terms of their environmental impact, from the embodied carbon of creating those products all the way through to the impact on biodiversity and of having them going into the soil and water supplies and stuff like that. I think that's a major challenge from the UK industry. I actually think applying across industry, there's a really big challenge around things like packaging and perceptions and customers and what they want. Because, it's an industry where it's a high quality product. People have a certain perception of what they should have and what type of product they should get and how it should feel. Things like the weight of the glass and even the fact that something comes in a bottle or glass. And we've used a really lightweight bottle for this product. And then I think in future, we're really keen to look at some alternative forms of packaging for this that will have a lower carbon impact. But there's going to be a massive trade-off there with people's perceptions of it, because, you know, if you get wine in a box, people look at it in a very certain kind of way.
But that's changing, I think. And I think that, again, that comes back to the job of wine communicators and the people who are posting on social media, the people who are writing articles, and it's our job in a way to encourage people to taste the wine within or look for lightweight glass. Don't be impressed by heavy bottles. That's our job, I think, in terms of a supporting role. Sometimes I see bottles where the winery may have commissioned an artist, or there's something unique about it, and the bottle weight becomes a completely sort of secondary issue. I think that's where we've got to try and work together a bit to push.
It's a bit tricky because in some markets, the weight of the bottle is like a measure for quality. So if you go to China, if you present them a lightweight bottle, they say, this is crap wine, without even tasting it.
Yeah.
Lightweight bottle. Now here in Europe, especially, there's a lot of consciousness about it. But it's also true to say, from a winemaking perspective, that wine in box or in can now, that is very trendy, is super cool, and it surely gives us a great alternative in terms of reducing even further our carbon emissions. But if you want to have a wine that you store in your cellar for 50 years, there's just simply nothing better than a bottle. So it's true that all these alternative packagings are very trendy, very interesting, but also needs to be meant for the right product. And here with Terra, we launched really something special, but also without compromising like the quality of the wine itself. So it's a lightweight bottle, but if you would store it in your cellar for 50 years, you can still drink it afterwards. So
yeah.
This is still the cool thing about, finding a compromise, at least for now. For the future, of course, it would be really interesting to look into different options, but still keeping in mind that if you have a wine in box, you have to drink it within a couple of years. So it's going to be a much more commercial product in a way.
Sure.
I think that's a sweet spot. It's like being incremental and, as you say, like nudging people to start making more and more choices that lead to bigger choices over time. But I also think for the wine industry, there are kind of your challenges unique, but I think there are actually some areas where they have an opportunity a lot of businesses don't have to have a positive impact, which is it's often easier for them to do stuff like Eleanor was talking about around installing on-site renewable energy capacity, which they have because they have this land and this space, and they obviously, that's a huge part of the emissions is purchase electricity, and it's a huge opportunity I think more people should do. And I think the other one as well is impact on nature. Obviously for COP15, businesses, nature positive, what can they do around nature? Because they have all of this, which is a bit of a luxury in many ways, all this land in this space. And I think stuff like they do in Contra Soarda, where they have habitat corridors to promote biodiversity, there's like a real opportunity there that most businesses don't have because they're a digital business or an office space in London or wherever, where they can't actually have directly on site a positive impact on nature. And I think if every vineyard thinks more strategically about doing that, I think it could be really beneficial. So I think there's some unique opportunities as well for the industry.
Okay. Wine is 2% of global agriculture. So I think it's also about taking these sort of leadership roles in stewardship, which is a great opportunity for the wine industry. I just want to ask about the sort of scope 3 emissions, the hard to abate stuff. How do you deal with these kinds of things?
So to give you a bit of a thing of what we've done on scope 3. So we tend to take quite a broad approach to scope 3 categories in every measurement. So you might be aware, but there's a lot of chicanery out there with the number of categories that even massive corporates will include in their scope 3. So you look at their CDP, they'll make a big net zero claim. You look at their CDP submission for their net zero target or their emissions, and you've realized that they've only got 1 or 2 scope 3 categories in because they've used a kind of loophole about relatively how big it is and how relatively small other emission sources is. But even if your waste emissions for your offices are relatively smaller than your business travel, you're still a global company and they're still absolutely very big. So for this assessment, we looked at all the purchased goods and services that the vineyard makes, bottles, cardboard boxes, the packaging, everything that they import. We looked at all of the shipping that they do, everything that's shipped to them and shipped out, all the business travel as well. We looked at employee commuting, people to the vineyard. We looked at waste disposal. We also looked at indirect fuel emissions as well. So emissions associated with upstream getting purchased electricity from the grid to the vineyard, the creation of the fuel used on site that comes under their scope 1 and the gas use. So we took like quite a broad approach to it, which brings a lot of challenges. Firstly, just measurement and finding out what those figures are and finding out how to get them. The biggest issue tends to be with purchased goods and services because you're so reliant on the suppliers for each of those. So it's actually getting information from the supplier, and then it's how much power can you have to prod the supplier to make changes or to do more. So can you get the supplier to do a life cycle assessment of their cardboard boxes so you have more accurate information? Can you get the supplier to improve the quality or the recycled content? That's, I think, the hardest bit around kind of scope 3 is dealing with the suppliers and your ability to try to influence the suppliers to reduce those emissions beyond just getting the data and measuring it in the first place, which is really tricky. And the more accurate the data, the more accurate the assessment, and the more accurate you can be in your recommendations.
Okay. And I mean, obviously we're starting here with one winery and we're looking, at how you've achieved what you've achieved, but ultimately we need to scale this up. What does the sort of ecosystem or the landscape for doing that look like? So firstly, are you working with other wineries now? And Eleanor, are you in touch with other people in your region? Are you sort of communicating what you're doing and how you've done it? Are they actually calling you and asking and saying, what's all this about? How is it expanding?
I wish this would be expanding more, especially in my country. And for this, I have to be completely honest. I think a very big gap here is that we personally never really focus on the Italian market as one of our major sales markets. So it's not that we are so well known in our country that people are really looking into us and say, oh, look what they're doing. This is mainly coming from abroad, from our importers. And we even started working with Terra, with importers that are doing the same process in Contra Soarda. So we now see customers around the world, for example, our Danish importer that has started an entire sustainability project on their company. And they also have big plans for the future to be a completely carbon neutral importer, distribution company. So they're also looking more into this type of products. So the interest came mainly from our current customers, but not really from other viticulture, which is a bit of a pity.
Yeah.
Because if I look around my region, but even looking in smaller within just my appellation, we are the only one that started this kind of project. And we are also probably 2 organic producers in the whole appellation. It would be much nicer to see more interest from producers, especially in our area or region, that would be more sensitive to this topic, but it doesn't look so.
To Jack, from your perspective then, as someone who's got a slightly different perspective and you're interfacing with British communities and businesses, etc., what do you sense in terms of uptake, interest, and so on from a business perspective as opposed to consumer?
Very quickly, just adding to Eleanor's point, I think something that I was quite about the ecosystem that I hadn't appreciated before was the importer aspect and going into these new markets and how much of a gateway importers are. And I think it is really interesting where you have the Danish importer that Eleanor mentioned, where they're now making that criteria. And I think they already had certain sustainability criteria they would look at. And then we went to them with this product and it was a concept and like an area they hadn't really thought about. And I think they're also now thinking about that and asking those questions to other wineries and saying what you do about measuring your carbon emissions. So I think, and obviously because that is the be all and end all, right? If you're exporting your wine, you need to get the importers to get into the market. So that feels very powerful. And I think that it would be good to have more centralized, higher levels of like certification and regulation around this stuff. So there's like a more rigorous baseline and you do have to meet it and it's very centralized and you can't cheat it.
I know Scandinavia is particularly good on their gatekeeper through the monopolies, etc., of putting sustainability demands in place. And Canada is another country that's quite strict. But I think the EU has some regulations coming in this year, which are very strict for big businesses. And I think eventually those will filter down. And I think the advice is generally to get ahead of the curve if you can and basically start doing this. So I think there's a sort of gentle tide moving in that direction, and those who adapt early will benefit. But I was interested in how your conversations with people are going. Are they very receptive? Are they saying, oh yeah, we'll look into that later? Or
I think the UK market is very different in terms of vineyards and just in general. I think it's such a big topic here, front of mind for businesses and consumers. We don't have anybody else we work with in the same way we work with Contra Soarda on the specific products, but we do measurements for other vineyards in the UK. I still think the wine industry on the whole is probably a little bit behind doing some of the hardcore analytical stuff like measurement. I think sustainability is certainly front of mind for every vineyard we've spoken to in terms of natural processes and nature and what they can do, and certainly from kind of they want it to be an important part of their branding and marketing. It's definitely a bit of a step to get them to go, okay, I do need to put the investment into doing a measurement to understand what our emissions are and actually approach it in a like sophisticated way. So I do think the vineyards that are doing proper measurements are quite advanced for the industry. More generally, businesses are very receptive to doing it at the moment, like in general, I think.
Okay. Eleanor, just very quickly, I know that we're talking a lot about sustainability practices, etc. You've just had a cracking heat wave this year across Italy. How did that affect you in real terms in the vineyard?
Well, in real terms, it reflected in very low yields. Just to give you an example, like now our major vineyard sites, the vines are over 20 years old, and the roots are very deep into the ground also because of our soil type, that is this volcanic rock. So it's permeable, and we are in an area rich of natural water sources. So during the very heat times, we have no irrigation. We just work with dry farming because, like I said, the roots are super deep and they always find this natural water in the underground. And at the same time now, with a changing climate, we experience very extreme weather. So we have these very long periods of heat, no rain at all. Like we experienced, or I think for the very first time in history, 100 continuous days of no rain. And it was in springtime. So imagine all the buds were supposed to develop. And this, of course, reflected then at a later stage in very low yields because the vines couldn't get the power to produce the buds and then the flowers and then the grapes. And then we experience in summertime like these water bumps. We call them like this. So a lot of rain and a very short period of time. And I think in our vineyards, we are very lucky because of this soil type. It's also permeable. So when we get a lot of rain at once, then it rains super fast.
And you've got good drainage. That's
good. So we're very lucky because we're also in a super steep slope. So otherwise we would even get erosion and it would be very dangerous. But for example, this spring, during these 100 days, we planted 1 hectare of new vineyard, and then we had no rain. We have no irrigation, plantation, nothing. So we had to fill our tractor with big tanks full of water and going vine by vine to irrigate them manually.
Of course.
And this, of course, I guess even in our upcoming next calculation, because also with carbon jack, the calculation is not something that you do once and then you just put on the side. It's something that you keep doing. So normally with carbon jack, they would like us to repeat the calculation every second year. So of course, this would also have an impact then on our waste and water consumption, for example. And that is not a little. Imagine irrigate by hands 1 hectare vines. But luckily we saved the vineyards, otherwise the investment would have been. But this vintage was really difficult, mainly because of this extreme weather. And then we also got heavily hit by a couple of hailstorms that luckily came at the right time. So that it was also the period when the weather was dry. So it did not develop, when you destroy a grape and then you get humid weather with high temperatures, then it develops molds and other diseases, other pests. But luckily, as the weather was dry, it just cut our yields. So we had a natural selection this year besides our own.
Okay. Well, can you tell us very quickly then just a bit about the process of making Terra as a wine?
Yeah, most of our focus it's outside. So we do a very, very long viticultural campaign that starts with the pruning. We work with the soft pruning technique that consists in following the lymphatic flow of the vine itself. So it's a very smooth way of pruning the vine. So the vines doesn't look like this, but it looks like a tree that it's supposed to be, right? So it's a very smooth technique. We do our first selection there. Then, of course, we implement a lot with our vineyards, depending on the necessities, because we don't do practices just because it's cool to do like a green manure or something. We just evaluate whether it is worth doing it, if it's needed, because we like a conservative approach, let's say. We intervene just when extremely necessary. But then, of course, we also work, we do our own compost. So there are a lot of, like I mentioned, the green manure to again implement the biodiversity. We work with full crop. So, and we also, in between the vines, we have a machine. It's a technical weed removal. We don't put any spraying or anything. It's just mechanical, and we free the vines from the underground weeds. And then, of course, during harvest, we have our second very big selection that consists of picking the very best grapes. And normally we work with a yield of 1 kilo, 1.5 kilograms per plant, so very low yields. Then luckily our processing is really fast, and our building, our cellar also facilitates a lot the entire processing, the entire transportation of the grapes. So as soon as the grapes are collected, they are already in a box, and in the box in the tractor goes on the top of the cellar. There we have another machinery, a selection table, so there's an additional selection. Then we have the stammer and crusher placed outside on the roof of the building. And then the grapes enter in a very gentle way. They enter by gravity directly inside the vinification room. So here are two important, it sounds like very tiny details, but the details are those that make the difference when you make quality wine. So first is the fast processing. This means that we don't have the grapes pressing in the case. So we prevent a lot of sediments. This means that we don't need heavy clarifications of the must. We don't need to filter the wines afterwards. So that improves a lot, like a tiny detail that then makes really the difference in terms of filtration and also having a nice and clear fermentation. And then again, we have all the unprocessed raw material, the stems or the grapes that are not selected, they never enter the cellar. And this means that we heavily prevent having spoiled organisms that enter the vinification room. This allows us to work only with natural spontaneous fermentations that obviously work with very good yeasts. So although it's a new building and so on, we rather pay a lot of attention in what we bring inside rather than analyzes the molds and the yeast that we have in the cellar. And then we have a maceration process, of course. So the grapes enter directly in the stainless steel tanks and they follow a whole vertical process. So even the tanks are divided in two smaller tanks, and we have the maceration process on top. And then once the maceration is finished, and normally it lasts for almost 3 weeks, then the wine is wrecked directly in the below tank. So again, it's a vertical process without the use of any pump or anything. The wine is separated from the cup and the solid part. And then we move the wine inside a barrel, both second passage or even some new barriques, French oak. And there we have a spontaneous malolactic fermentation. And again, inside our cellar, we have no machineries that control the temperature. This is all done naturally by being underground, because our cellar is built completely inside the mountain. And then we also take advantage of the drainage systems that we built back in the 2000 by having airflow circulation inside the building that allows us to have always fresh and clean air at cost zero, basically. So even in our aging room, it's a very smooth and natural process because we have the temperatures that allows us to not worry about it. And then we leave the wine inside the barrel. For us, especially in the red wines, we like to use the oak a lot. This doesn't mean that the wine needs to taste oaky at all. But of course, for having a clear natural stabilization of the wine, you always need the oak. So either you add additives, or you have a little time in oak that prevents you to filter the wine or to stabilize the wine, because even the protein stabilization is done all inside the oak naturally. And then we simply take the wine from above so that the sediments just remain in the bottom, and we bottle the wine, just adding a very tiny amount of SO2 prior to the bottling, and that's it.
It's a very meticulous process.
Yes.
Just to end on really very quickly, is obviously we want more people to be doing this, and it seems like there's a good synergy between Carbon Jacked and your wine brand that helps you talk about it in a better way and helps you present something to consumers. For 2023, what do you see? What's going to be the big step? Have you got anything on the horizon that either from the winery side or from Carbon Jacked side that is like an ambition, a target, or anything like that?
From our side, I think with Terra, I think the big ambition, certainly personally, Eleanor is working on getting it into lots of different markets around the world. I think we're quite interested in the UK market because we think it has a really strong consumer aspect. So we've just got it here with an importer. And so now we've just started speaking to businesses and restaurants and selling through our kind of website to individuals and our members. And so I think for 2023, we're really interested in seeing what we can do with it in the UK and some interest we can generate, because I think the market is kind of perfect for it.
What's the name of the importer?
So we're going through Winemakers Club at the moment, so who actually stock Eleanor's other wines as well from Contra Soarda. And actually how we actually first came across Contra Soarda was having a bottle of their Musso wine at Winemakers Club in London. So we're using within them for the moment.
Very good. And big challenges for you. Obviously, I think the white wine for coming out of next year's harvest would be good.
Yes, exactly. I was about to say that. Yeah. This is really our goal. Also because, to have a pair of the, a white and a red was always how we thought of the project. So, and obviously for me, I mean, not just for next year, but for the following years as well, is to really use Carbon Jacked expertise to continue reviewing our entire processing and improve our entire processing. So now in January, it's the time of the year that we need to review all our calculations, and we hope that some improvements have been made in the meantime. That would be a great achievement from our side in terms of wine production. And I really hope that this will be just a starting point of turning our entire portfolio into being carbon neutral. So you always start from little steps, and then you try to spread the concept to the entire production. And this is my long-term goal.
Great. Well, look, thank you very much. It's been really, really interesting to hear about the project and how it's working. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Lovely to talking to you. And I really hope you can cheer for the new year with a glass of Terra.
Absolutely.